excited to host the second of Impact Florida's Lunch and Learns here, specifically around the idea of how do we get more students into algebra and into advanced mathematics in middle school. And so, for many of you were with us when we had a couple of you presented last week when we talked about this with Pasco County. And we're excited to have you back today to hear from Indian River. Our goal really with these is to help we get the opportunity in Impact Florida to talk with many of you across the state and learn about all the great things you're doing, but we want to create spaces where you all can come together to share with each other so you can better learn from each other about strategies that may be applicable in your own district. So we're excited to do this. At the end of our time today, we will be sending out a link for a feedback survey. If there are specific topics or sessions or things you're interested in, or things that you know of that you think would be great to share with your colleagues around the state, please put those in there we'll follow up. We're really excited about doing this. The first one went really well. So I'm going to very quickly here hand it off. Our presenter today is Rick Meyer, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Instruction in Indian River County Schools, longtime friend and a tremendous educator. So Rick and his team at Indian River were part of our data impact cadre. So it's where we first got to hear a little bit about their approach to 90 by 9, which I'm sure he'll speak more about in just a second. And so he's going to present. If you have questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat, and we'll have a lot of time for Q&A at the end. We've got a small and tight group here, so we're excited about that. So Rick, we'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, sir. And yeah, as Trey mentioned, I'm just proud to be part of your group. I by no means am presenting today to hold myself or the district up as an exemplar of this is exactly how you do it, because we don't know yet, right? What the outcomes are going to be, but what I've learned from these statewide organizations, certainly Impact Florida leading the way with that charge, is there's a lot to be learned from just being humble and coming together and being honest and sharing with where we're at. I think that, if you guys ask me tough questions, it'll help me grow and learn. And, I can present some ideas that maybe you haven't thought of. Maybe, I don't know. You guys are pretty clever people. But yeah, just very much looking forward to the conversation and where we can go today. So the journey to 90 by 9, as we, started looking at our data as we came here, we wanted to come up with, aspirational goals of where we could be. Looking at our algebra pathways, wanted to set that goal of making sure that 90% of our students have achieved algebra success by the 9th grade. And so that's where the whole 90 by 9 comes from. Certainly, when you look at statewide data, our internal data, we generally get there. Every year is a little bit different in each district, ours included, as far as how many students get a concordance score and graduate by their senior year. But we want that to be accomplished as early as possible, because we know that algebra is certainly a gatekeeper to many other advanced courses. So not just getting that concordance score by graduation, but having a successful algebra graduation requirement met by 9th grade is going to set our students up for where we want them to be. So here's our journey to 90 by 9. So thank you, Kelly. You're good at this. I was a minute or two late, so some of the people you're waiting on might have been me, because I was at a superintendent's advisory committee, student advisory committee, and I had students that were asking questions to me. So, and I was supporting them, so I couldn't leave. I just, oh man, they're engaged with this. This is a superintendent curriculum instruction. This is great. So they're gonna help me out with the slides because I was just right here in the nick of time. But yeah, 4 points today. Going to talk about the way it is, right? Because when you come into a new organization, one of the first things you get met with is, well, that's just the way it is here. And then, from there we move to why is that change imperative? I'm going to give you guys a little status report of where we're at, and then address some known and unknown additional / future challenges of where we're going with things. So Kelly, you want to jump ahead and like I said, sort of tease you guys with this, because the way it is, I was at the Department of Education for a while, and I got there and I started asking questions, why is this, the way we do things? Well, it's just the way it is. Well, I learned that I needed to start reframing my questioning to people to say, why were we doing it that way, right? Because when you reframe things as to why were we, it almost puts into the people's minds, we're about to do something different. Because clearly, when you look at Indian River, the system that Dr. Moore and I inherited here, we don't feel like it was hitting its peak potential. Every school district, every superintendent, everybody always talks about doing better, and that's clearly the reality here as well. But when you look at, the fact that every demographic subgroup was underperforming, right? I mean, it wasn't just a matter of inequity that, some subgroups were outperforming the state or performing well. Even subgroups that you would historically think are high performing, your affluent white subgroups, they were below the state average, right? And so if that's the case, then we don't need to talk about, the way it is. You can talk about the way it was, right? Why were we doing something? But ultimately, it comes down to, what are we going to do to change this? And so that takes analyzing your current policy and looking at, existing data results. As we shared, and to some of you already, the number of students that we were serving in eighth grade algebra, and I've got a data slide later that will show the change we made, was not all the students that were sort of targeted by the state with the 3 and above policy. It wasn't anywhere close. And the data slide you'll see in a little bit will uncover some of the challenges that was really an inequitable policy. The sort of teacher recommendations, different additional assessments that we were given. We're really creating barriers to students taking algebra by eighth grade, which of course, if we're going to have 90 by 9, that is a tremendous issue. And a lot of this conversation was revolving around middle school algebra proficiency rates. But one of the other challenges that we saw when we got here is that there was even that continued belief in high school that ninth graders couldn't do it. And so we weren't giving an opportunity, the first opportunity to some students for algebra until 10th grade. And so that just, we have to challenge that existing belief structure that students can't do algebra, right? They can't do it. And that's just, there's myriads of statewide data that disproves this. There's many of your districts that are doing, phenomenally better than what this district was doing. We are going to do better. And so that's been sort of the point of conversation, is that yes, every demographic subgroup can do better than what they're doing. And that's what's about to happen, right? One of those things that can't be taken, out of context is the impact of COVID. Like I said, when we came into this situation, I joined this team in February, and 30 days later, 20 school days later, we were in the great shutdown of 2020. And that created some opportunities for bold leadership. That created some opportunities when people were grasping for, what are we going to do? The same sort of people that would always, maybe historically say, this is how we do it, that would have given us maybe a little bit of challenge. They were clamoring for somebody to take charge, like, tell us what to do. And we did, but that was a challenge, right? Responding to that, because, in a normal year, you would maybe targeting your students who were 3 and above in 7th grade. And there were some early indications from the department that the policy may change for acceleration, at least to do that prior and go from 6th grade. And we still don't, I think, have any clarification on that, unless you guys got something today before I was with the kids. I don't know. Yeah, but we created that policy and put all of our students, our 8th graders that had a 3 and above from 2 years ago in 2019, 6th grade, they all went into algebra. And that was just the way it was going to be. And we felt like that was going to, be the right choice by kids. We put all of the students who were matriculating up to 9th grade, they all went into algebra. The students who, were historically level 1s from 2 years ago in 2019, 7th grade, they got a double block. They got 1A, 1B. And we sort of just planted that flag this year, knowing the challenges that we're going to be faced with of course, innovative learning options. And, we talk a lot about that, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But it has an impact on some of the results and things that are happening, of course. This was the year to do it, right? And we did that, and I'm going to share with you some results. But next slide there, why was that change so imperative? In my experience, I've been in a couple of different organizations now, United States Army for a few years, a small rural district, Department of Education, and now sort of a medium district down here on the Treasure Coast. Believe in the mission is critical. You can drop that hammer and tell people they have to do things, and that works. That works. You can do that. I've done that. I've had people do that to me. But when you can get buy-in, when you can get people to believe in the mission, you're going to get better outcomes. And so, what we've done with this throughout the past few months is really have that conversation, and that's why we want to create another initiative. It's sort of catchy, right? 90 by 9. That there's a reason for this, right? And so a lot of the talking points that I've hit on, the moral obligation for equity, you start talking about this, and you start talking about a lot of the work that I'm sure everyone on the call is exposed to about the opportunity myth, right? It's not just an achievement gap, but it's an opportunity myth and an opportunity gap that exists. And if we're going to ever achieve equity, then we have to have policies that really speak to that. And having the policy we used to have where we weren't even giving everyone that at bat wasn't right, right? And maybe, people, just to be honest, not everyone's equity minded. One of my former mentors, I don't know, you guys can tell him I said this, I gave him some props, Jacob Oliva, would go through the different orientations of the curriculum. And so we learned, with Jacob through that lunch and learn how to talk with people with different sort of mindsets about academia. That's a great one, by the way, to learn different ways to speak to people. But some people just buy into, they may not be all about the equity lens, but when I tell them how important it is for the students to master algebra so that they can go on to other courses, I had some math teachers like, you're right. We need to give them access. Let's start doing this. And so they were buying in, but of course, those are the eighth grade teachers. Like, so you're going to get the sixth grade teachers to get them more prepared, also, right? Like, absolutely. And so they were just math minded and they understood, but they were sort of set in the belief they wouldn't be successful. And then, coming into a district or a situation where you're at, for me at least, I've always, been on teams. I was in, I don't know if I hesitate to call myself, I was an athlete or athletic, but I love being a part of sports teams, right? I love the spirit of challenge. And, we're trying to inspire that esprit de corps here in Indian River, that we are going to improve. We are going to increase our ranking amongst districts. We want our community to feel like they have a high quality school system. And we want each school, to beat their chest and say we are a great school as well. And not just ho-hum, not just, how we are sort of sitting to ourselves and saying, oh, well, it's just the way it is. We're average, so you get people inspired to do something and they'll buy in, they'll give you their heart and soul. And that's what we're giving to this district that we haven't even grown up in. And so, between those three things, with our algebra teachers, we've really come a long way this year. We had to alleviate some concerns, right? Because some of them, they created some of those barriers to entry because there was this pressure to get 90 to 100% of the students in eighth grade algebra to be successful. And we know that when we open up the door for more students to participate, we're probably not going to get as many of them to pass in that eighth grade year. I do strongly believe that if they had a 3 or above in seventh grade, they will easily meet that concordance score within the few months after algebra, giving a second shot at it. But certainly they were sort of at that grade level range in seventh grade, and they're not going to be the sort of students that we wouldn't anticipate meeting a concordance score sometime throughout their high school year, right? And just saying, I just need you to reach these kids. We need to give them the credit. One of the things that we could also talk pretty deeply about, I'd be curious to learn from you guys, is, to my knowledge, the state doesn't direct how we transfer an EOC grade into that 30%. It's got to be 30% of the grade. So what are we doing to ourselves here, right? We have some local control over some of these things, and what changes might I need to lead at the district level around grading policies to support the teaching and learning for the middle schools to make them feel less apprehensive about this. But those are the sort of talking points that I would go through. And we're not all the way there yet. I'll share here in a second where we are, but a quick status report from this. You're gonna get that next slide there, Kelly. Like I said, we instituted that hard policy, right? That this is what you're gonna do. Then we had to have a methodology at the district level, and you guys have some talented people. I've been in your districts when I was there at Just Read, so I know you've got some talented data people across the state. We created a Power BI dashboard where Dr. Brian McMahon was able to sort of run a comparison and would show us how many students at each school. So I could call the principal and say, hey, you got 2 kids that still aren't there. Can we get what's going on there? Dr. Robinson, I don't know if Eddie, you were able to join the call, but Dr. Robinson was great about that. He was part of our data cadre. Oh yeah, they just came in, or they're, Rick, that kids, they're not on there because they're doing Florida Virtual School algebra, but we made sure they're doing it. But we did have to have those checkpoints so the district could make sure the policy was running smoothly. And we knew that if we were going to do things like this, that we would need to provide additional support. So for the first time, outside of our Title I schools, we ensured that we had a methodology of providing coaching support to those middle schools to make sure the math teachers, were able to grow and be supported, and some changes to instructional practices, quite honestly. And then, of course, you have to monitor student progress. This year, we don't need to belabor that, I don't think, too much with COVID, but it was a reality, right? It was a reality of students switching between the instructional models that our district, I'm sure your districts had, and the impact that had on their, anticipated performance and sort of the best laid plans of mice and men, right? You think these students can do it, but in a year like this, are they being as supported as they would necessarily need to be with all the transitions? But we've maintained, still many students still in there. We've had a few that we've allowed to get out, but we've been able to monitor that progress and I think provide that support. So a quick little snippet of the data change, right, is up next. And obviously we have Asian and multi racial students and other demographics in there as well, but we're kind of a small district and they don't show up as much. I mean, the Buckley, right? So it's under 10. So I didn't include those, but you can see, from EdStats and 18-19, how many test takers we had. And this is currently, the students we have enrolled in algebra that we would anticipate taking the algebra test. And so not to get into the continuation of, are they going to show up to test? I'm sure we're all wondering about all that sort of stuff, right? But this is how many we've got enrolled. And you can sort of see the disproportionality already. And I get it. Each cohort's different. We're going off, sixth grade data, but I looked at this in a couple of different grade levels and in a couple of different years or cohorts, I should say. And the pattern was there, right? I mean, and I think a couple of years ago, we only had like 20 African-American, Black students that took the exam. And it's just very interesting to me that now that we put this policy in place and said they're going to do that, everyone's going to be in this. We've doubled the number of Hispanic students, and we've almost doubled the number of African American students that are going to attempt the test. And you can see, those of you that are real good at the math, right? A third of our white students were not being identified either. So a little disproportionate, but certainly, very noticeable, very noticeable number of students that weren't given that opportunity. And I keep going back to, the belief structure, right? I mean, the 30% in the high school credit, and they're going to fail, and their GPA is going to be ruined. Well, why? I just ask myself, like, as a teacher, why are we giving the kids? Why are we? I get we don't give them grades; they earn their grades. I get that, but why our grading policies are our own. And if that's our mentality, is that we love to throw out those Fs as secondary teachers, I don't get that. I mean, I'm sure that you guys feel the same way in your districts. You've got K-2 teachers and everyone's sunshine and roses and they all pass. And then you get into secondary and it's like, oh, you're all going to get Fs. There's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere where we're able to, really be honest about what grades the students are getting. But yeah, that's an immediate impact to the enrollment. Some other results there on the next slide, Kelly. Some lessons we've learned. We have to address, as I mentioned, those eighth grade teachers. They're not wrong. Many of our students are showing up even though they can get that 3, but in seventh grade or sixth grade. But there's some gaps. And that's what they were sort of alluding to, and concerns. And so if we are going to achieve 90 by 9, the only way for our district to do that, and it's probably those of you that may already be there or you're closer to it than we are, is addressing math pathways all the way from fifth grade, right? In our district, we do have the advanced courses that allow students, like once you go into middle school, you're going to be in sort of the honors, right? It's the sixth grade advanced, seventh grade advanced. But it's just crazy to me that fifth grade FSA could sort of be determining your whole algebra career. You go into a sixth grade advanced class or regular class, which is parsed out from 3 and above and 2 and belows. Maybe you move into that 3 range for seventh grade. With the way we were doing things with teacher recommendations, maybe you're not even moved into advanced math. And even if you got a 3 in seventh grade, you still weren't, moving towards algebra. So just kind of crazy to me that, we really need to look at what we're doing from 5th to 9th. It's not just a 7th to 8th question in order to get there. So the other thing, we talk a lot about it, intensive math and intensive reading and spaces for the students that are our lowest quartile students just because of school grade type things. But What about those students that are your low level threes that really could do it if you had that support structure for them? And Dr. Robinson gave me a call last week, the week before, really looking for a pathway forward for that. We're going to move to a 4x4 block schedule, which is going to enable us to have more electives. So, a student who, might historically, parents would push back about them having two math classes. When we let them know like this is, very much a benefit for them to go ahead and knock algebra out in eighth grade, because it's going to open up so many additional math pathways for them as high school students. What sort of course can we give them that doesn't, seem to be an intensive math class, but it's a college success course, elective type thing. Yeah, I'm very, very excited about that, right? Because those students deserve to have a class to support them with what they need to be doing as well. But the third bullet there, just being honest and humble, maybe we was a little too heavy-handed with some of this at first, right? We were going from prior. We're going from sixth grade. Clearly, the impact of the fourth quarter of last year with a lack of instruction for some students was a huge detriment. And I think Pasco uses the term off ramps. I may steal that. That's pretty clever. But we just know, like with any testing thing, there's going to be false positives. You're going to have students who, are not, great math students. So they've been level 1, level 2 math type students since third grade. They get in there to seventh grade and something happens, they get a 3. And they're like, all right, Mr. Meyer, I really appreciate the confidence, man. I love it that you want to put me in algebra, but I don't know how I got a 3. And that can be pretty, come on, man, I got your back. I got you. You can do this. And they're like, yeah, I like that additional math class. But let's just be honest. I mean, every assessment has false positives, and we can't be so heavy-handed with things if that really isn't going to be for the benefit of the child. So we're going to have those discussions here in the next couple of weeks with our teachers. I think that I'm not going to relent whether they go into it at the beginning of the year, but be more intentional around not hurting them and harming them with grading practices, making sure we're supporting them and really addressing and looking at disaggregated data for the number of students that we may want to allow to use a quote unquote off ramp. And I'm learning from Pasco and their work on that is great for me to see how they're doing that. Because we can't, let just certain demographics of students be the only ones who we allow that to happen. You've got the false positives, but you also have the false negatives. It is not an uncommon thing that your more affluent white parents, even though they're not qualifying for these courses, will say, "Put my child in there." And historically speaking, I think we find across the state and in our districts, you see more of those students who get into the advanced classes than you have some of the students who should qualify that are minority students who don't get in. So it's looking at all that sort of stuff as well. And of course, who knows, right? COVID-19, it's gonna be an interesting year across the state as far as what happens with testing, how we can use these results compared to other years as far as the cohort, which students are going to test, which types of students are going to test, are high performing students, low performing students, will it be you know, an appropriate subset? I don't know, right? But that's something we know that we need to make sure and just really move into that differentiated instruction that we're seeing. I think you guys are seeing too for math. I mean, there's just a lot of weird gaps. You missed this certain unit because you actually had, COVID, or you were quarantined, or your teacher was quarantined, and how is that playing out into the results that we're getting. And then just the last thing, what we know, what we learned from this, on my last slide there, Kelly, is our teachers are resilient. At first they had some apprehension, but they were phenomenal. They're just absolute heroes, and willing to do this and willing to buy in and that they showed up to work. I mean, read the news articles from across the country. Our teachers showed up. All they wanted to know is if we were going to put students in those classrooms, if they weren't as successful, were they going to be dinged? And like I said earlier, we had some of those conversations of, I understand you're going to go from a 95% success rate in your algebra class to probably an 80. That's right where I want you. All right, I'm fine. And they're like, okay, can I get some help with some development and some supplementary resources? Yes, you can. And our students are capable, right? I mean, our students, it's exciting for some of them to see the light in their eyes. Like I said, a few minutes late, dealing with students who, are seniors and trying to get their transcripts and things, they're capable. It's exciting. And no offense, my friends at the state, you guys were all local folks too, but it's just been cool for me to be back at a district and to have that personal connection to see what our students are capable of doing. And the coaches really made a difference. The coaches made a difference in the success of this. We've got probably some, Dr. Robinson, I keep referencing you because you're on the cohort. I think you may be on, I don't know. Brag about his coaches all day long, and the schools that we've seen more success this year, it certainly has been around the coaching. So tremendously happy with what we've done with providing additional coaches where that didn't exist, and then the scheduling, how you're doing your scheduling, what time of day, which teacher, what else the students are doing, who's involved in the class, that sort of stuff it makes huge differences. It just does. The Algebra 1A, 1B thing that we were discussing, had some challenges because of master boards and things of that nature. But when we move into this, 4x4, the intentionality is to have math every day for the students who need it, right? And not having, math for 2 periods out of their 4 on one day and wearing them out with half a day of math. So if you're going to use block schedule and you're going to use these other classes, you need to be strategic in what period they are. But obviously in a year like Rona, not always easy to do. But well, we need to watch, like I already addressed it, though, the FSA results, and what happens with the adoption of the math products. Coming from Just Read, was very excited about ELA. I'm equally excited about math. I'm very intrigued about the middle grades math pathways, and also what sort of supplementary intervention materials, intervention products may be part of that adoption, because I think that's really needed. And then just talk about shift in mindset, how many times you have to have those conversations with teachers, with parents, with counselors, with principals. We'll see if they start buying into it on their own, or if it's something we have to push from the district. But I think that we're starting to see that buy-in from some folks. So, wanting to see how that goes. But that's in a nutshell what we've done. Like I said, just one district out of many that are on this pathway. I always have learned, learning from you guys. As when I was at Just Read, and miss traveling to some of your districts and learning from you. So can't wait for the next 30 minutes here to hear your questions, to push me to tell me what you've already learned, right? And similar challenges and recommendations. Just would love to open this up to a great group conversation. Appreciate the Impact Florida people for helping getting us going with this.
Well, thanks, Rick. And as you guys are starting to put your questions together, feel free to put them in the chat. You can also unmute yourself and jump right in. I've got one question to get us started.
All right.
So, Rick, you mentioned that you had some policies in place that acted as gatekeepers. And I know one specifically was how the students were being scheduled. But can you share some of those that you identified so that we can be on the lookout for them in our schools and districts across the state?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a lot of ways, they were school-based policies. So I think the first thing what I wanted to do was to look to see what the district-based policy, and if the district did have a policy. So that would be something that I would ask to the other districts and to be on the lookout for. Is this something that your district is actively taking control over, or is it something that you leave to the schools? And if you leave it to the schools, then I think my recommendation would be to have somebody smart like Brian McMahon give you a printout to see who's doing what, because I think you'll find is that there's going to be some variance if you let it be local control within the schools. And so that is just one little piece that I would say take a look at. And you have different size districts. You got some small rural districts where there may be only one middle school or two, so it's not we don't have many. We're, like I said, we got 4. But yeah, I mean, I know we got some larger districts. There may be 10, 12. I don't know who's the largest district on the call today. See how many middle schools they've got. I mean, obviously, it takes some oversight to make sure that it's running smoothly. And it would just be very curious, like a district that would have 15, 20 middle schools, if they allowed autonomy. Boy, oh boy, I mean, you're going to see all kinds of different policies pop up with the algebra pretest. You got to come in. One of the things they were doing at one school for a while, for a period of time in this district, is you had to come in during the summer to take the algebra pretest. So think about the barriers that would create. with transportation. I can't even make it in there. And that's a barrier. I mean, so, there's things like that. I think that one, they got rid of that one before we got here. I'm sure they did actually, but yeah, just eliminating these barriers and creating more supports, I think, is really the direction to go.
And speaking of supports, I'm just curious at what kind of well, you did mention you have a teacher meeting coming up soon. And so I'm curious what kind of supports are in place for those teachers. And is it about mindset? Is it about buy-in? What's really the focus kind of for your next step with your teachers in your schools?
Yeah, I think it's at first is listening, and saying taking it with a grain of salt, but you really do have to listen, closely to what they're saying, because it's been a tough year. They have been asked to do things that no one could have imagined, and it's been a challenge, right? It's been a challenge to get a lot of this accomplished, but we want the buy-in from them, right? And we want them to believe that the kids can do it, and that's where, to me, I guess a little bit of apprehension as far as the results. You don't want results coming in this year, and when you do something like this and they're tremendously lower than they would have been, and then people say, oh, well, as I told you, there's going to be too many kids in there, when it was really, the number of instructional hours we lost, or the continuity between students switching schedules. So, I think that's just, continuing to keep people positive, right, about this, because like I said earlier, there are districts out there, some of you guys maybe even on the call, that are seeing, much more success as far as percentage of students in 8th grade. So it can be done. We are ripe for success, and that was even with the sort of cherry picking that was going on. So definitely opportunities for that. And I see Ms. Pickett, accelerating earlier to maintain coherence. Yeah, I mean, definitely looking at what standards and what how we combine those, what materials we're using. But let me ask you a question. If you could, tell me more about what you mean by that, because I want to learn from you. My concern about accelerating earlier without, supporting is you start to have that dichotomy of students, right? You get the honors track and the regular track, and then these guys are on one side of the hall and these guys are on the other. And I'm not entirely certain that I'm ready to do that too early. I mean, clearly you have to start doing that with math at a certain point, more so than ELA or science or something, because you do need to start moving quickly towards algebra, geometry, algebra 2, and not every student's going to do that. So I'm curious about what you mean by earlier. Like, let me learn from you. What do you mean? Push me.
Well, yeah, to clarify, so when I heard you say that you were using the 6th grade scores, and granted last year because of COVID and everything else, that was, a unique situation, but thinking forward in terms of if you're using, say, 6th grade FSA scores, like for your current 6th graders, and you're like, oh, we have some students that scored level 3 on FSA that weren't in an accelerated course, could you accelerate them to pick up those 6 advanced standards over the summer? Because now we're used to giving out devices and hotspots and everything else, and then maybe have them do accelerated 7th. That way they're getting those pre-algebra concepts and maybe have a firmer foundation to move into algebra in 8th grade.
I love that idea. I mean, I think that's, when we get that data in, and especially, with what we're thinking about doing with those different style of additional math classes, which don't have to be all year. That's a great point you just made. I mean, if we see kids who, weren't ordinarily scheduled to move into that, what can we do to support them and bump them up? I love that idea. That's good stuff. I'm gonna steal that.
If I could maybe add to that, just kind of to combine both questions, what we did have an online course that taught those missing standards from advanced 6th grade math prior to algebra. That actually ended up being a barrier to our low socioeconomic and in turn our minority students, because it was online, it was during the summer. It was basically asking students to learn themselves. So I would just say, kind of as a caution, you don't want to put up a barrier that disproportionately affects enrollment in that 7th grade algebra. And honestly, what we found is that the online course did not do anything. It was not, it did not do what it was intended to do. Students who did complete it, they weren't learning. It was just kind of a real quick completion thing. So
Yeah, but Dr. Mann, that's a great point. I mean, and that's where, you know, the barriers is something we really are trying to eliminate. But like I said, if we can do that during the year, you know, and give them that additional support, and maybe it's a both and, I think. But Dr. Mann's point is exactly right. In the past, those things were barriers, whereas now we need to take some of those concepts, modify them, and turn them into good the good ideas they should have been.
We've got a quick comment in the chat. We do a summer packet over the summer here in Santa Rosa and provide a teacher at each middle school 1 day a week for support. And Floyd, I don't know if you want to unmute and share a little bit more about that.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so we have those standards that when students advance through our curriculum, and if they are going to advance to a course where they may miss some standards, we provide a packet with the problems that go along with those standards. And so as kids are working through that packet over the summer, if they have problems, they can come back to their middle school, and 1 day a week, there'll be a teacher there who can kind of work through those questions and standards with them for support. So when they're skipping that curriculum, that packet is there as a bridge to provide that support for those students. And so we know that's an issue when we turn them loose over the summer and we say, hey, complete this packet, we'll see you in August. So we want to be there for those kids every week in case while they're working through the packet, they have questions.
Absolutely, and that's great. And is that, Ms. Smith, that's like your 6th to 7th graders, they're moving from 6 to 7 going to algebra, is that the targeted audience there?
Yeah, that is the audience. We have those 6th grade students who are moving to algebra as 7th graders. And then we have the 7th graders who are advanced moving to algebra. And then we also have a packet for those 7th graders who were in algebra moving to geometry as an 8th grader. So for every one of those courses in the tracks, we provide that packet for the standards that they may miss as they skip that content or curriculum.
That's great. That's great. But, you know, and I think that's the way to go. And I think we also, like I said, in one of the slides, really need to just realize that this is not going to be a normal year of progressions. We're going to have students that have gaps just because of the COVID, because of quarantines, because of teacher changes and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I love the idea of creating something like that and implementing in a way that is equitable. But I think that I would want to, you know, dig in also around what skill sets they may be somewhat deficient at, right? On the aggregate, they're ready to go, but I think that we're going to see some really interesting fluctuations in skill gaps that we could use that same strategy to fill in.
There's a lot more great comments here in the chat. So Mary had a quick question about the summer packet. Is it a requirement for acceleration? Jump in and answer.
It is a requirement, but we kind of enforce that loosely, meaning that we require them to do it. So as they go into the summer, they believe that it is a requirement. But when we get to the course in the next school year, that pack is a part of the welcome back to school type of intro into the curriculum, and it's a review of that packet to start the year. So, but over the summer, we provided, you know, a due date in our student progression plan that if you're accelerating, those packages must be due by, because we do want the kids to be exposed to those standards and have an opportunity to work through those over the summer. But so yes, it is a requirement, but we do allow them to work through it during the first couple of weeks back to school before we get into the curriculum for the next school year. And I just want to add the mindset that was spoke about earlier for increasing the number of students going into algebra as 8th graders because of opening up for the level 3 students to get into algebra. That is certainly conversations that we had to have here in Santa Rosa County with our teachers, because as you guys know, that they're used to that 100% success rate because we've been putting the cream of the crop in those classes. So when you open it up to those mid to low level 3 students, because we want to make sure that we're exposing those students to accelerated curriculum, that is some conversations that those principals had to have with those teachers. But what we've learned since we've done that our percent of success has not dropped at all as we've opened, because those teachers are our best teachers, and they're going to teach those students, and they're going to bring that expectation level up for those students who may just be a mid to low level 3, but they're going to teach them in such a way that they're going to be successful on that EOC exam.
That's fantastic.
And a quick ad from Jeff in Santa Rosa as well, that they provide instructional videos for each standard that they cover. So that was just a little tap on there. And then from Marion County, we have, they're sharing that they have a 3-week algebra boot camp at each middle school, which is offered through their summer program with transportation provided to preload the standards as well. It's also another option.
Is that you know, I think it's a great question about requirement or request, and then I mean, is it for everybody, or do you just target a certain, you know, type of student demographic there in Marion for that?
So we too discovered that our opportunity gaps were very strong in minority subgroups, and just as y'all had spoken about. So we are actually using that through our Avid elective course. Most of our students who are going into that class are in our Avid elective, and so we're able to utilize it that way. We're not all Avid school-wide here in Marion County, but most of us are getting there, and so that's how we're targeting and pinpointing that group of kids.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So the Avid students that go to the algebra boot camp. Gotcha.
And I hear you guys talking about low level 3 kids too. Am I the only one that are putting level 2s in algebra?
We haven't gotten there yet, but yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, you saw our data slide. It was a lift, just you know, almost double the number of 8th graders going into algebra. So, and we got to crawl before we can walk. But yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that's properly supported, and if the students buy in and the whole culture and the principal buys in, I believe in them. I think they could do it.
We tried that through our expectation piece too, and I'm kind of guinea pigging it to see if it'll happen or not. But I got rid of all my regular courses in all classes except for math. So we have advanced language arts, advanced world history, advanced civics. So all of our courses here are advanced except for the math classes because they're so much more specific. So trying to change that mindset with high expectations as well, that's what we're working towards.
Thanks for sharing, Melissa. And we have another question here, really geared towards the 8th grade algebra students who do not pass the EOC. When are there additional supports for them when they are placed in ninth grade?
So, you know, I guess Indian River, we'll go first, but I still want to learn from everybody else, right? But it's interesting now. You know, I think the change to the rule about 3 and above in geometry was in result in not having the EOCs, but it's going to change, I think, a lot of our policies of how we think about that. Because in my mind's eye, like I said earlier, if there were a student that I believe could do algebra in middle school, I just believe they're going to get a concordance score somewhere around the road, right? I mean, and so I don't know that I would, you know, I don't know that I would not focus on geometry that 9th grade year and try to get the 3 above in geometry in 9th grade, which would meet the concordance score. You know, you still have concerns if they didn't pass the EOC that maybe they're not at the level of mastery at the algebra standards they would need for algebra 2 and other coursework. So you would continue to want to support them. But yeah, I'd be curious to see what other people have done in the past and what we're thinking about doing in the future as far as those level of supports. So what are y'all doing in Santa Rosa? What are you guys doing, Melissa? What are y'all doing? What are you and Deborah? Well, my friends, tell me what's going on here. What do we do?
In Santa Rosa, we basically when they fail the course, of course, it's, you know, over the summer when we find out, and we just allow them to continue to go through our summer algebra remediation that we do at our high schools. So the feeder high school that student would go to, we put them in that remediation program over the summer, and they do the same prep as those 9th graders who would have needed to retake the summer retake EOC. And so that's the way we prepare them in Santa Rosa County.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a quick question around, after Algebra 1, I'm curious on the call how districts are using other courses. Are you using liberal arts? Are you using Math for College Readiness, MCR, or other options? Or are you sticking to strictly going from algebra to geometry with your students? Just out of curiosity from a former high school math teacher.
So we were formerly doing liberal arts, then algebra, then geometry. But now we're algebra 9th grade if you haven't had it, then geometry in 10th grade, and then still under discussion since this is new, a new pathway for many of our kids, and results and outcomes are a little unknown, and we do want to be flexible. So discussions, those courses obviously are all those courses you just mentioned are offered, but it's having a discussion about what is best for the student at that point. I think they know a little bit more about their junior year as to what career path they're going to take, and the doors have been open for them as far as I'm concerned, as knocking out that algebra so they could move a little bit different direction to get their 4 math credits. So we're still looking at that, I guess, to see how that shapes out. And I don't have as passionate like that must do this in my mind. So yeah, I'd be curious to hear what other people are doing, their thoughts. But we've got Dr. Mann on our team who he's a great source of resource on that. Dr. Mann, you want to share where you think we should go in Indian River? Because I listen to you a lot.
Can you reshare the question?
The beliefs about pathways. If we're going to do algebra, then geometry, then the use of a liberal arts or a math for college readiness, for students who may want a different sort of pathway than those that are moving the engineering route, that are going to go after stats and calculus and that sort of stuff.
I always felt that our adult bias greatly influenced student performance. I think that more students would be successful if it weren't for the adults. I remember there's a study out of California that estimated about 8% of second-year algebra students were successful when given the same curriculum with the same instruction, the same specific to algebra, meaning if they didn't pass it the first time, giving it to them a second time is not helping them. And I think sometimes when we delay, as a student, you get bored with the same standards. And it's not the same thing, but it's very similar when you are going from 6th grade math to 7th grade math, to maybe pre-algebra and to liberal arts. A lot of it is very similar. And so I think that what we end up doing is just kind of punting, and kids just get frustrated. Those tend not to be the best teachers. And you ask any adult, hey, how are you with math? And they'll either say great or terrible, and you ask them why, and it's because of a teacher some point in their academic career. And so when we delay that algebra year over year, and they're not getting the best teachers, it's kind of like, what do you expect from these kids? Of course they're not going to pass, and they've already written themselves off as a bad math student. So for me, I was never a big fan of kind of delaying things. A lot of the barriers that we had in place to early algebra, teacher recommendations, like I mentioned, that online summer course, it were barriers that really did not impact results. It just further delayed and pushed off some of that. So then our high schools, the 12% success rate on algebra, 16%, and it's ridiculous. But I think at the high school, it's like if we're getting the algebra, it needs to be almost a different instructional model, different curriculum, different set of how to reach those kids, a lot more social justice, real world application type learning. So I don't know if that quite answered the question, or maybe just starting my soapbox.
I think these are all really great conversations, and I think it's important, not only for us on the call, but our teachers as well, to hear, your thoughts and the district's philosophy. And another great comment, kind of question in the chat. This conversation highlights how critical it is for teachers to know the math standards, and how and to make sure that they're familiar with coherence of the standards across grades as well. So we're just curious to hear from you all in Indian River and others on the call, how you're helping teachers and coaches, with the math standards and the coherence as you kind of move forward.
I'll just insert my opinion real quick. I think it's hugely important, but it goes beyond. It's really just a critical eye for the standards, because I think sometimes We believe that each standard must be mastered prior to moving on. And my experience has not been the case teaching Algebra 2. If you gave a fractions test, just fractions, most kids would fail that. But then you give them an application in which fractions must be used, and that application really is gravitational to that student's ability. It's like they pick up that fractions along the way. And I know that's not, I'm not going to author a book on that philosophy, but to that point, I think it's critical that they know the standards, but which standards are truly important, which students can be addressed just through some remediation and a typical next course instruction, and which standards truly do need to have some kind of outside support for those students.
But Kelly, also to your question for us, at least, since we're sharing a lot, Brian and I have talked a lot about the need for professional development and the knowledge of math. I mean, coming from Just Read, there's a lot of professional development about the science of reading, right? And we're trying to increase teacher knowledge about the science of reading, but unfortunately, it appears to me that a lot of the professional development we provide to our math teachers is around pedagogy and instructional practices, and we aren't building as much, deep knowledge about coherence and the math standards themselves. So my hope is that as we implement these new standards, the best standards, that we can focus as a district on professional development around math to those math teachers, and not just on pedagogy and not just on the content limitations of the assessment and things of that nature, but we're really building a deep knowledge of math. And I think that's something that we probably haven't done, honestly, as well as we could have in the past. And you're nodding your head as math teacher, so maybe that's accurate. So maybe you can recommend some good PD on math for us.
So I want to jump in on that one as well. I think an issue with addressing coherence among standards has a lot of different roots. I think one of them is just a traditional textbook setup and this kind of pattern that we've followed historically of what standard are we teaching? Okay, what context do I want to introduce? And then let's have this conversation. And then when I start standard 2 the next day, I'm going to pick a brand new context or something completely different, and it's siloed. And so context typically gets chosen after the standard is decided rather than vice versa. And what we would really like to see, and places that we're looking to in the future, are trying to choose contexts that are rich enough to span multiple standards, and so students can stay in one context and explore and see the coherence between those standards. But teachers don't have access to curricula, any curricula that do that currently. So that's a national level problem and a national conversation that really needs to happen at the textbook publisher level, or uniquely in some PD and districts, teachers are going to have to create those kind of environments on their own, which is heavy work for sure. Also, I think another piece that's a challenge with that coherence is just the ability for students to be able to hang on to those contexts outside of a single day's worth of instruction. When you have 5 other classes going on, life happening at home, and you come back in and you get reintroduced to it. There's some of those things that in the moment just have a deeper impact than they do if you step away from the table for 12, 18, 20 hours, at a time, multiple days at a time, if it's over the weekend. So there's some discontinuity pieces that are, kind of tough barriers. But I think the big piece there is us being able to find context that can span multiple standards. And Richard, to your point, I think with the best standards, you are going to see some advantages to the structure that's being used there. Those specifically in Algebra 1, the strands in 9-12 are built by function type. So all of AR2 is focused on linear functions. All of AR3 is focused on quadratic functions. So it really speaks to the idea of being able to pick a context and then being able to have an entire group of standards that surround that are really clearly delineated. So excited to see that work move forward, but it is huge work to be able to move that ball.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I want to just jump in here because we're running very, very short on time, but we've had a tremendous discussion, and thank you all so much for your time and for your energy, not only for being here, but for the work you do every day on behalf of children in your districts. Yeah, I know Kelly's a total math nerd, and I'm also a former elementary math teacher. So there's a lot of us that care very deeply about this discussion, and I know there's a lot of folks outside this call that do as well. If any of you have thoughts about how we could be helpful to Impact Florida in furthering this discussion, Kelly or Jason's going to put the link to the survey in the chat in just a second. Please tell us what you thought of today. Tell us how we can keep the conversation going, and how any of this, where there might be opportunities for us to help knit a few of you together to work on some of these big challenges. Because I think we all face, I mean, sometimes we all get into our district silo, and there's tons of work to do in that space, but we all know the challenges that you face, whether they're in Indian River or Pasco or anywhere else around the state, are very, very similar. And that I think oftentimes it's our belief that we can see a lot more progress when we can find ways to work together across those contexts. So Rick, thank you. We appreciate your time. We know you've got a lot on your plate. Thank you to all of you. And we'll talk with you again soon.
Thanks, Trey. Thank you guys for doing this.
Have a great afternoon, guys.
All right. See y'all later.